Have you ever wondered why Greek mythology, out of all the mythologies that came from the ancient Proto-Indo-European world, became the global superstar? I mean, think about it. We all grow up hearing names like Zeus, Athena, and Hercules. Oh, wait, sorry, Heracles. But here's the question. Why is it that when people talk about ancient mythology in movies, books, video games, and pop culture, the Greeks are always the ones center stage? Why don't we see the same level of fame for the Vedic gods? Why not for ancient Persian mythology? Why not the Baltic or Slavic gods, who were also descended from the same Proto-Indo-European roots? And before we get into it, yes, you're probably noticing that this voice sounds way too smooth to be mine. That's because right now I'm using an AI voice generator. I'm still working on upgrading my mic setup, but until then, I'll keep the narration clean and consistent for you. Quality matters, even when budget and equipment are leveling up. But anyway, let's jump into the real mystery, because the story of why Greek mythology became the most famous is actually a story about language, power, culture, politics, war, poetry, movies, colonization, scholars, and a very unexpected twist involving a book that's thousands of years old. So, let's begin. When people talk about Greek mythology, they usually think about beautiful temples, heroic warriors, dramatic gods, and ancient wisdom carved in marble. But the truth is, Greek mythology is actually just one branch of a much older tree, a tree whose roots go all the way back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans. These were ancient people who lived thousands of years before the Greeks, the Indians, the Persians, the Romans, the Celts, the Germans, the Slavs, and many, many more cultures even existed. From this single ancient culture came gods who evolved into Zeus, Indra, Thor, Perkunus, Jupiter, and so many others, each changed by the lands, tribes, and societies they entered. So if the roots are the same, why does one branch, Greek mythology, stand out so much more? Well, to answer that, let's step into the ancient world. Not the world of temples and statues, not the world of Hollywood, but the world where ideas themselves were fighting for survival. Most ancient civilizations had stories. Everyone from the Proto-Indo-Europeans down to tribal groups around the world had rich oral traditions, but storytelling is not what made Greek mythology famous. Here's the real secret. The Greeks were not the first to invent mythology. They were the first whose stories spread globally. Why? Because Greek culture became deeply intertwined with philosophy, science, art, politics, and eventually global trade. Greek mythology didn't just stay as mythology. It became literature, it became history, it became philosophy, it became education. It became a symbol of Western civilization long before the modern West even existed. And this part is very important. Greek mythology became popular not because the Greeks preserved everything, but because the people who came after them, like the Romans, the Byzantines, the Europeans, kept promoting it over and over again. But this is just the beginning, because now we need to talk about a huge misconception. Have you ever heard someone say, Greek mythology is one of the oldest mythologies in the world? Well, it's not even close. This is where the Rig Veda comes in. The Rig Veda, one of the foundational texts of early Indian civilization, is actually far older than most written Greek texts. The hymns in the Rig Veda preserve myths, gods, rituals, and cosmic concepts that belong to one of the earliest surviving branches of Indo-European culture. While the Greeks recorded many stories later, the Vedic tradition was already documenting ancient concepts of gods like Indra, Varuna, Agni, and many more. These weren't simple myths. They were philosophical hymns, cosmic poetry, and spiritual frameworks. So does that mean Vedic mythology should have been the most popular in the world? Logically, yes. Culturally, yes. Historically, yes. But popularity doesn't follow logic. Popularity follows power. And Greece, despite being older than many people think, was not the oldest civilization. But it did become part of the most influential cultures in world history. Let me explain. The ancient Greeks had one thing that changed their entire destiny: geography. Greece sits at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. It was like the ancient version of a major airport where cultures, traders, ideas, and invaders constantly traveled. This turned Greece into a cultural blender. Phoenicians brought writing systems. Egyptians brought mathematics. Mesopotamians brought astronomy. Indo-Europeans brought poetic structures and mythic archetypes. Persians brought philosophy and statecraft. All of this flowed into the Greek world. And what did they do with it? They wrote. Oh, they wrote a lot. Not just myths, but tragedies, comedies, dialogues, histories, poems, essays, political theories, scientific treatises, and philosophical debates. And they wrote in a style that was dramatic, emotional, and very easy to translate. Meanwhile, the Vedic texts were spiritual and linguistic masterpieces, but they were also complex, ritualistic, and extremely tied to specific cultural contexts. You couldn't just take the Rig Veda and turn it into a theatrical tragedy. You couldn't easily translate the deep metaphysical symbolism without losing meaning. Ancient Indian civilization cared more about preserving and transmitting wisdom within the culture. Greek civilization cared more about performing it, debating it, and broadcasting it to the world. This difference in storytelling approach fueled everything that would come next. But writing alone wouldn't make Greek mythology famous. Plenty of ancient cultures wrote things down. The real explosion happened when the Greeks were conquered by one guy, a 20-year-old king who changed the world by age 32, Alexander the Great. Alexander didn't just conquer Persia, Egypt, and parts of India. He spread Greek culture everywhere his army went. Greek language, Greek art, Greek architecture, Greek philosophy, Greek mythology. This created something called the Hellenistic world, which connected Greece to Egypt, to Persia, to Central Asia, all the way near the borders of India. Suddenly, Greek stories weren't just Greek, they were international. And here's a detail most people miss. Alexander carried a copy of the Iliad with him everywhere. He saw himself as Achilles. His soldiers saw themselves as heroes. Rulers he defeated were compared to mythical enemies. Greek mythology became part of identity, part of propaganda, part of empire. Even after Alexander died, his generals built kingdoms that continued spreading Greek culture. So by the time Rome rose to power, Greek mythology was already famous across 3 continents, which leads us to the next major twist. Rome. Rome loved Greek mythology so much that they copied it like enthusiastic fanboys. They renamed the gods. Zeus became Jupiter, Ares became Mars, Aphrodite became Venus. But the stories stayed almost the same. And here comes the important part. Rome ruled one of the largest empires in human history. They controlled massive parts of Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. So wherever Rome went, Greek mythology went. Not as Greek mythology, but as Roman mythology, with Greek stories inside. This is how the stories entered Europe. This is how they reached scholars, libraries, churches, kings, universities. Then something even bigger happened. Europe colonized much of the world. And when they established universities, schools, libraries, art academies, and political systems across continents, what cultural tradition did they teach? Greek and Roman classics. This is how Greek mythology entered the Americas, Australia, Africa, East Asia, the Middle East, modern India, and almost every global education system. This is not because Greek mythology was superior. It's because Greek mythology became tied to the political and cultural systems that expanded across the planet. Meanwhile, other Indo-European mythologies weren't as lucky. Let's break that down. Take the ancient Vedic tradition. India had enormous cultural influence in Asia, but Indian literature was often preserved in Sanskrit, a highly sophisticated language requiring deep training. Indian stories spread through religion, spirituality, and philosophy, not through political conquest across continents. Persian mythology was disrupted by invasions and religious transitions. Baltic mythology survived mostly in hidden fragments. Slavic mythology was suppressed by later powerful states. Celtic mythology was pushed aside by Roman influence. Germanic mythology lost countless texts because of Christianization. Greek mythology survived because every major empire that touched it kept promoting it. Indian mythology stayed sacred and philosophical. Greek mythology became universal entertainment. And that entertainment aspect is crucial. Greek myths are filled with drama, scandal, betrayal, romance, heroic journeys, monstrous creatures, moral dilemmas, tragic flaws, and spectacular battles. They read like epic movies. This is why Hollywood loves them. And speaking of Hollywood, this brings us to another huge factor. Modern media. When movies began dominating culture in the 20th century, directors needed stories that were visually dramatic, emotionally simple, easy to adapt, already recognizable, filled with action, and not tied to active religious practice to avoid controversy. Greek mythology was perfect. Heracles again, became a pop culture icon. Zeus became the go-to lightning god. Medusa appeared in movies, games, merchandise. The Trojan War became a template for epic storytelling. Meanwhile, many Indo-European mythologies remain deeply connected to active religious practices, cultures, rituals, and local identities. Filmmakers were cautious about adapting stories that could offend living religious groups. So one became entertainment, the other remained sacred. And here's something interesting. Whenever Hollywood did touch Indian or Indo-Iranian stories, they often did it poorly, inaccurately, or superficially, mainly because they didn't want to offend anyone, and also because translating such deep stories into simple movies is extremely hard. Greek mythology, however, had no such limitations. It was already secularized, already mainstream, and already taught in the West. And once something enters Western education, media, and entertainment, it spreads globally. This is how Greek mythology ended up everywhere. But here's the twist. This doesn't mean Greek mythology is superior. In fact, many deeper mythological systems, like the Vedic tradition, contain more philosophy, cosmology, spirituality, and psychological depth than most Greek myths. But the world doesn't always remember what is deepest. The world remembers what is most visible. Greek mythology became visible because of geography, writing trade, Alexander Rome, Europe, colonization, academia, Hollywood, pop culture, globalization. It wasn't popularity by merit, it was popularity by momentum. But here's the final truth I want you to take away from this. Greek mythology didn't rise alone. It rose because the world lost, ignored, or misunderstood many other Indo-European mythologies along the way. Celtic stories were erased, Slavic stories were rewritten, Baltic stories were scattered, Germanic stories burned, Iranian stories changed across eras. Vedic stories survived but were never exported as global entertainment. So when people say Greek mythology is the most famous mythology, they're actually seeing the result of thousands of years of history, politics, war, trade, and storytelling, not the result of which mythology was the best. And by understanding this, we appreciate not only the Greek stories, but the enormous diversity of mythologies that shaped the ancient world. This is why learning about Proto-Indo-European mythology is so important, because it connects all these traditions back to one ancient origin, one ancestral world, one forgotten structure behind all our modern myths. It's like turning on a light and seeing how everything is connected, and that is why this topic is worth exploring. If you want to know how Proto-Indo-European mythology influenced Indian mythological culture, how early gods evolved into the Vedic deities, how concepts spread, and how ancient stories traveled, then definitely watch this video next. And as always, if you enjoyed this breakdown, drop your thoughts in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe for more mythology content.